Black Myth Wukong is one of the biggest things in the gaming world currently, hailing from a country that I'm quite shocked doesn't have more AAA titles from, given China's gaming population and just their population in general. What I'm not shocked by is how big this specific game is, with it being inspired by the extremely influential novel Journey to the West. But Black Myth isn't a retelling of that story. It's more what happens after, but that still doesn't require you to actually read it. You can jump right into this game and still understand what's going on while still having a lot of fun. Many say that this is a Souls-like, and while it does borrow some aspects from those games, a lot of other people have also said it plays like God of War, and I would agree to that. Me, I can't and I won't compare it to any of the Souls-likes simply because, well, I haven't played any of them. Look, I know I'm like one of the 10 people who still hasn't played Elden Ring, but I will soon. But that does help me a little bit simply because I won't be in the headspace to try and compare these games, and I'll be taking Black Myth for what it is. At the end of the day, it's really just a linear action RPG, and it's a good one at that. So if you haven't played it yet, sit back, let me tell you about it. And if you have, then maybe you can understand some of the things I'll be saying. The most important thing about games is obviously how it actually plays, and I think there are a lot of cool aspects about the mechanics in Black Myth. The actual combat is pretty simple, which just consists of one button for the light attacks and another for the heavy attacks. And the combos have the same few animations, however, you can still try different button variations to do different styles of attacking. There are also 3 stances that can change up how you fight, but it doesn't rework your entire fighting style. It just primarily alters how the charged heavy attack is used. The stances can also add different attacks when you interrupt a light attack combo with a heavy attack. A certain stance might be more optimal to use against certain enemy types compared to the other 2 stances. You might mix up all 3 or stick to just one. It all depends on your playstyle. I primarily use the strike stance to attack foes from a distance, or even the pillar stance, because when you charge it up, you actually avoid all melee attacks from the ground, even though it can still kind of affect you. And I find those stances to work best with me, but every now and then I might try the slam stance because that has more versatility where you can actually charge it up as you're running around. Whereas the pillar and the strike stance, you're locked into a stationary position to attack. But apart from the actual attacks you do, you also have a handful of spells. Yes, that's right. You're a magic monkey. You have 4 slots that you can use to aid you in combat, and each of these slots will be given a spell as you progress through the game. There are more than 4 spells, but you can only use 4 specific ones in combat, but can swap them out whenever you get to a checkpoint, which are these cool looking shrines. One of these spells allows you to freeze your enemy for a few seconds to let you get some hits in, another lets you deflect or parry an incoming attack, and another creates a ring of fire that basically gives you a buff or a stat boost. Unfortunately, the spells are locked into their given slots, which means you can only swap a spell out for the only other one in that slot. For example, you can swap out the freeze spell for the ring of fire, but you can't swap out the freeze for the deflect spell since they're in 2 different slots. I think it would have been cool to allow you to swap them since you could customize the spells to your liking better, but I can understand why for the sake of balance, because you could probably make some really broken builds if they allowed you to do that. Another cool thing about the combat is that you can actually transform. Sun Wukong has the ability to shapeshift into other forms, and they allow you to do that here too. It is limited, but it's still cool, and it's something that makes this game a bit more unique. There are 2 versions of the transformation. One is on the spell wheel and the other isn't. Main difference between them is that the one on the spell wheel is longer and allows you to actually control the character you transform into. However, the transformation that's not on the spell wheel does have a bit more variety simply because it just has a bigger volume. The smaller enemies you fight have this sort of leader that once you defeat it, you then get the ability to transform. Speaking of enemies, there are a lot of them. I'm talking 90 plus bosses. And this game didn't feel like too much of a boss rush, at least from my playthrough of it. There are a lot of bosses you can just randomly run into one after another, but that's primarily because the direction is a bit confusing. Like, there's literally no map, so wherever you go, you have to remember where you came from or sort of just wing it. And that can cause you to just wander off and fight a boss that's not related to the story at all. And even with the fact that there are a lot of bosses, each one that I have fought has all felt unique, and they don't feel like reskins of the same 10 bosses. They each have their own movesets and abilities that will annoy the hell out of you, because yes, this game is quite hard. For me, like I mentioned earlier, I don't have any experience playing any Souls-likes. So maybe the ones that do might have an easier time with this. And similar to Souls-likes, this game has no difficulty settings. So everybody experiences the same type of aggression and combat from enemies. I really like this because there can be other players who might have difficulty with a boss that you didn't, or you have difficulty with a boss that they didn't. So even if we're all on the same playing field, the experience can be entirely different. I do think there is a good balance with the difficulty, where at the beginning it is quite sort of weird because you're trying to get accustomed to the controls and everything. But as you progress, obviously the enemies get harder, but you get better. So when I was playing this, I felt as if the bosses were easier to fight simply because I was getting more skilled, but it was still a challenging time. And also you'll be just getting better armor, better upgrades, and like I said, your overall skills will improve. The game is split into 6 chapters, and I will touch on this soon, but for each chapter you can actually go back to a previous area in a past chapter if you need to go back and get an item from a certain boss that you didn't fight. If you do decide to go back, the bosses end up being so laughably easy to beat. Like a few hours ago, this type of boss would have had me fight them multiple times, but now they get washed in one attempt. A lot of the ease can be from you having better armor and just better gear, but also just being better at the game. For example, I had to go back to chapter 1 to get 2 items from 2 bosses, and I had absolutely no trouble getting through them with ease. The first one, he did damage me a few times, but that's because I don't know what I was doing. But the second one, I don't remember him actually touching me. So there are 3 notable bosses I want to talk about for a second. One being a boss I really enjoyed, and the other 2, not so much. My favorite boss in the entire game was the Tiger Vanguard in chapter 2, and wow, he was straight up the most entertaining fight I've had in this game. If there was one word to describe him, it would be aura. And I know that word has been run into the ground, but it perfectly encapsulates his demeanor, his everything, his aura. He just has aura. Everything about the fight with him is amazing. His moveset, how fast he is, the weight of his punches, how big he is. Pause. Even the setting where you fight him is amazing. You walk up these stairs with bloody carcasses laid across them, and when you get to him, the entire battle is in a pool of blood. Oh my gosh, he's so cold. He's like an amalgamation of Tiger Claw from TMNT and Sukuna from JJK. Tiger Claw because, well, they're both tiger ninja bounty hunters, and they even got similar swords. And the comparison to Sukuna, because whenever he's not beating on you, he's using dismantle and cleave. Like, bro, calm down. What? Now, the 2 bosses that annoyed me the most were both in Chapter 6, one being the Supreme Inspector and the other being a damn praying mantis. The Inspector just had the weirdest moveset and the weirdest abilities that were just plain annoying. And it makes it worse that he is like one of the first bosses you fight in Chapter 6. But the praying mantis, oh man, he was just irritating. The whole time I'm fighting him, I know he's really not that hard of a fight, but at this point I just wanted to get the game done. I wanted to finish it. I wanted to get to the last boss, and he was just in my way. And it also didn't help that I was being very aggressive when I was fighting him, and he is an extremely aggressive boss. And when you fight an aggressive boss, you kind of have to be on the defensive. I wasn't doing that. I would say that I don't get extremely mad when I play games. I tend to be very calm. At least I would say I am. But this one boss, I mean, apart from some others, this one had the most rage come out of me. No! No! Dodge, 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 Billy. Are you serious? Yeah, not my brightest moment. To talk a bit about the actual story of Black Myth, it's difficult without spoiling anything, so I will. No, I'm just playing. I'll spoil a little bit. I'm only going to mention something that happens in the prologue, so before chapter 1 even. But if you don't want to hear any of it, skip to this time. The entire premise of the game makes you believe that you're playing as Sun Wukong, and technically you are, but in the prologue, as you're fighting Erlang, this guy, you get defeated. After that, you then start your actual journey and are referred to as the Destined One throughout the game. The way that I interpreted this was that you play as a monkey from the same place that Wukong is from, and you're basically trying to become his successor or become him. I wasn't like too sure. I thought of it as just being his successor. Now that that's out of the way, we can talk about the story in a general way. Like I mentioned earlier, this game is split into 6 chapters, and each chapter is a new area with new enemies to defeat. And throughout these chapters, you collect these relics that help you through your journey. Each chapter ends with a final boss that is obviously harder than the rest in that chapter, and once you defeat that boss, there is a beautiful animation that plays right after it. These are like my favorite things in the game simply because, well, I love animation and think it's one of the best mediums of storytelling, apart from video games, but I just really like animation. Each animation is a short film with an entire story in it, and most of the time it has little to no dialogue. Also, they're all animated in their own style. Good job to all of the animators who worked on this. They did amazing. What the story really boils down to, at least from what I interpreted, is that it's about self-discovery. Finding out who you truly are in a world where everyone assumes what you are and what you're capable of and tries to have you fit in this mold. Every character that comes across you already knows who Wukong is and what you can do. But as you progress through the story, you start to figure out how this character fits into this world and the relationships you have with everyone. I've seen lots of people who review this game say that there isn't too much of a story here, and I can understand why they think that. And maybe I'm grasping at straws here, but I think as you get really close to the end, you could probably start to understand what I mean. It doesn't reinvent the wheel, but I do think there is something solid there. It's just unfortunate that it came later than it should have. I play this on my PC, so I'm primarily going to talk about the performance on my computer. I think I have a decent computer, but nothing high end. I'll have my specs in the description or like somewhere on the screen if you want to reference it with yours. Throughout my entire time with the game, it ran pretty well actually. Apart from it crashing after the prologue, which that scared the hell out of me. I was terrified that either my PC wasn't good enough or this was an issue with the game and this was going to continue. But thankfully, it didn't. It was only just after that, booted it up again and worked perfectly fine. My default settings were all on high, but they also have higher options like performance and high end. It goes without question that the visuals and the graphics were absolutely stunning. Everyone was already aware of this from the trailers, so nothing new. The only thing that didn't look great, at least for me, was an item you get in Chapter 6. It looked fine, but when I saw other people's footage for their gameplay, and when I saw them use that item, it looked so much better than mine. I could still see the pixels for it and it just looked dusty, if that makes sense. Also, when I fought the Supreme Inspector, I was having some frame rate issues, but that was an easy fix of just restarting the game. Overall, the game ran very well for me personally, and the little issues I had came late game and were inconsequential. But for PlayStation gamers, I have this one friend who got on his PS5 and the complaints he had about the performance was a lot worse than what I thought, so maybe for PlayStation users it probably isn't the best. So is Black Myth Wukong a good game? Well, yeah, I would testify that it is. For what it promises to be, it does it extremely well. The gameplay is challenging, fast, and takes a lot of trial and error, but also extremely fun and rewarding when you do beat that one boss that takes you forever to beat. The story doesn't do anything mind-blowing, but I think that's okay since the gameplay is just so fun. There's also just a lot of stuff in this game, but it doesn't feel bloated. Like, there's a lot of content, but you don't feel overwhelmed. It's more so, it's quality matches quantity. You will probably pour a lot of time into this game, and while I don't equate time to quality, I do think it plays a factor on the amount of money someone is willing to spend on a game. And the fact that this is made by a studio that just made mobile games before, for this to be their first AAA game, I think they did an excellent job. At the end of the day, it all comes down to what sort of games you like. If you like challenging, brutal combat with beautiful graphics and interesting lore, then this is probably for you. If not, then you'd be fine skipping it. And if you've played Black Myth Wukong, then tell me about how it went for you. What bosses you liked the most, which ones gave you the most trouble, and just in general what you liked and disliked about the game. Well, that's all for me, and this was Black Myth Wukong.